welcome to this week's episode of the Mixtape with Scott. I am your host, Scott Cunningham. It is December 1st, 2023. I just had a wonderful interview with Hahn, who's a professor of economics at the University of California, Los Angeles, and the author of many works in econometrics. And including one that I think some of you probably are familiar with, or maybe many of you. It's this 2001 article in Econometrica that sort of was, I think, probably the first or one of the first real theoretical econometric papers about regression discontinuity design and identification. It was with Petra Todd and Wilbert van der Klauw. Petra, who I've interviewed before, and Dr. van der Klauw, who I'm hoping to one day also interview. It was wonderful. I hope you like it. You get a lot of great history of a really great econometrician, and just sort of walking through his life and the opportunities that he had and that that he made the most of. Let's see. Other than that, I was going to make some jokes, but I can't remember what I was going to do. So maybe just pretend I said something funny and use that to sort of transition into this interview. Thanks so much for all your support. We have just a couple more weeks and season 2 of the Mixtape with Scott will be concluded. I think we're going to have, in the end, over these first 2 seasons, I think we're going to have about 80 episodes, if you can believe that. It's kind of crazy, the sheer volume of this. I guess I would just probably say one thing. I love doing these. I really do. I love getting to connect with these people. I love hearing their stories. I think probably some of you have figured out that I really love the history of the profession. Not just always the history of the thought, even. I just love the stories of the people, and I love the history, and I love the thoughts. So I like the biography of economic theory or economics. The biography of economics is what I've been thinking more and more is what I really love. And I couldn't do it if I didn't see every week that people were downloading the podcast. I guess it's possible some of you have some sort of automatic button that just automatically downloads, but I don't think it does, because I've seen some that don't get downloaded very much. So I think it's got to be more than just the buttons. Anyway, thank you. Hope you enjoy this. Don't forget to like it and share it and all that stuff. I mean, you don't have to, but if you do like it, then you can send them this interview with Dr. Hahn. I think actually a lot of people will really love it. And I hope that some young people hearing it will kind of be inspired and think, that could be me. All right. See you later. See you in a minute. Well, it's my pleasure today to have with me on the podcast someone whose work I've followed for a long time, but we've never had a chance to ever meet before, Dr. Jinyong Hahn. But I don't know if I've said the first name correctly, Dr. Hahn.
People call me Jin, the first syllable of my first name, because that's easier to pronounce, and it sort of reminds them of a cocktail, I guess. So,
Jin Hahn. Okay, great.
Right.
And so can you tell us, for the listener, what your title is and who you work for?
So I'm a professor of economics at the Department of Economics, UCLA.
Okay, great. All right. So I like to start these off with what's called an icebreaker. Can you tell me a memory of a vacation that you had as a kid that you still sort of remember well enough that it kind of comes back to you every now and then?
Wow, family vacation. Yeah, so, I think I was very little, and it's not really a fun memory because our family went on to a beach, and somehow my sister got lost, and we were frantically trying to find her.
Oh, gosh.
And there was an announcement from, I guess, some kind of a lifeguard station, like, there's this, girl who has this description, parents or brother, please come forward. So,
Oh,
so that is a distinct memory.
oh,
I mean,
wow. That's I bet that was a panic. Your,
Yeah,
your
but
parents
they're
were
more
probably
panicked
nervous.
to my parents, I
I
assume,
bet.
because I was just a little kid, so I don't exactly know what it was, right?
Right.
But yeah, I don't know whether she still gets lost. I'm sure that she does.
Well, that's great. Okay. Well, so tell me, where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
So I grew up in Seoul, Korea, and it was not a very it was a very typical childhood in South Korea. I would say just go to school, come back, and school days were long.
Mm.
It was like that. And yeah, by the way, come to think of it, it was the military dictatorship. So in high school, we had to have this military service.
Oh,
Even in college, we had to do this military service. So I have a couple of C's in my transcript, and both were in military training. so, so yeah. So I'm grateful that when I applied for various graduate schools, they sort of ignored these couple of C's. I'm
they
sure they
did.
did.
They like didn't care about the military
Oh,
grades.
right.
They're like,
Maybe they liked it. Like,
yeah.
okay, this guy is not going to
They're
be a
like, that's why
general.
this guy is applying to grad school. He's not going to be in the
Exactly.
military.
Exactly. So
Right.
yes.
So you said you said the school days were long. I didn't know that about Koreans
Yes.
schools.
So back. So in some sense, it's even worse these days. So I don't know. The school days are like you start at 8 or 9 and you finish at 3. And so in that sense, it's not so bad, but you take a bus to go to school and that's
Mm,
like an hour. You take another bus to get back to school, get back home. That's another
yeah.
hour. Oh, so by the way, this might be I don't know, subconsciousness. This might have provided some subconsciousness to my research because back then, so Korea had traditionally in the 1950s and 1960s, there was this strict hierarchy of high schools
Mm,
depending on the academic performance. But when I was going to high school, this was all abolished. And in order to make sure that all the high schools have the same amount of, I don't know, good kids and bad kids, let's put it this way, they used the randomization to put kids into different high schools.
oh,
That led to my long commute because
oh,
you would think that that there will be some kind of a clustering of, let's say, upper middle class parents into
right.
certain neighborhoods, right?
Yep.
And if you actually decide which school you are going to go get into based on the proximity, then there's going to be this natural selection based on the, let's say, class,
Yep.
socioeconomic class of the parents. And in order to avoid that, they use this computer-based randomization device to,
Mm,
send the kids. And come to think of it, maybe that was the subconsciousness, that the cultural subconsciousness that they have helped me when I did my
right.
research afterwards. So,
Did you
yeah,
notice that as a kid? Your family sort of were like, "Oh yeah, he got this bad draw, so he's got to go a really far distance." Y'all were sort of aware of it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you knew it
yeah,
was
but
y'all would talk about it being this random event or
yeah,
whatever.
exactly, exactly. So, but in some sense, I was lucky because I got into a high school which was supposedly very good traditionally.
Mm.
So even though the kids who got into that high school were from all over the place, the teachers were very good,
Oh, so
reflecting the
they weren't randomizing the supply side; they were randomizing the demand side.
exactly. So I
Uh,
suppose that the Korean Ministry of Education believe in the network effect more than
right,
the, I don't know, human
right,
capital effect, I
right,
guess.
right.
So yes, so it was a strange days, but they tried to, make it as egalitarian as possible, which I
Mm,
guess is a good thing. But
hmm.
the bad, you, know, you can't have everything, right? Because some kids that would have to ride on the bus longer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right. So you grew up in the city? You were
Yes,
like,
I did. Yes.
oh, okay.
So yeah, it's a funny story. I grew up in the Gangnam district, which is there is this Korean pop singer whose song became pretty famous. What was it? Gangnam Story?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Gangnam Style.
Yeah, exactly. Gangnam Style. Exactly, exactly. So so Gangnam refers to a geographic location in Seoul, and I grew up from
Mm.
there. So
Oh, okay. What was that like?
it's a Gangnam just simply means the south of the river, just like Rive
Oh,
Gauche in Paris. And so this was a place where the many upper middle class professionals would choose to live. So
oh,
so in that sense, so yeah, I'll be precise. So I'm not from the poor background. I'm not from the very rich background. I'm from the upper middle class background.
yeah.
My father was a banker, and so he made a decent living, but he
Hmm.
was not part of this channel or anything.
Right.
So that's what my background is.
Oh,
And
see. What did your mom do?
she was a homemaker, but she had an important influence on me because her degrees, college degrees from mechanical engineering,
Oh,
and because according to my mom, after she had born 4 children, she stopped working because it was too much.
yeah.
So according to her, she was bored and she would teach me math when I was young.
Oh,
So
really?
yes, that was her hobby.
Was she the stronger math
Yes,
parent?
yes.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yes. So I still remember, she's screaming at me for not understanding how the Pythagoras theorem works.
Oh.
And I was in kindergarten, by the way. So,
And so
so
from an early age, you really liked the math, though? You really enjoyed it?
uh, I didn't. My mother loved the teaching math to me.
I see. Okay. Okay.
So yeah, but so that was, I would say that's a little different from other kids, in the sense that typically mothers are not that good at math, relatively speaking.
Hmm.
But in my household, my mother was a stronger mathematician,
Mm.
and so she would give me an easy pass if I didn't do well in, I don't know, literature, but she would be really disappointed if I don't do well in
She
math.
wasn't upset about those military grades?
She was fine.
Well, so when you go to high school,
Right.
how big was your high school?
Oh, 900 students per year. So that was a big
900.
one. Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly. So
Okay.
2,700 students altogether. So it's 3 grades are coalesced in this high school.
Oh, 3 grades.
Right. So
Sophomore, junior,
right, exactly. So
senior.
it was we call it a 6-3-3 system. So 6 years in the elementary school, 3 years in middle school, and 3 years in high school.
Oh, I see. Okay. And so if I like could go back and talk to your teachers, they've got 900 kids that they're looking
Right.
at. What kind of kid would they have said that you were? What sort of things would they probably have sort of noticed about you that made you sort of stand out?
So obviously, because of my mom, I was pretty good at math.
Yeah.
I wasn't very good at physical stuff.
Uh-huh.
So uh, I guess I was socially, nimble enough to, I don't know, avoid any trouble
Yeah.
from any of the school bullies.
Yeah.
But so I think I was socially, adept in this regard. But
Mhm.
I don't think I would have stood out as a physically fit type anyway.
Sure. Sure.
And I don't think I was really good in literature anyway. I still remember struggling to understand the meaning of a poem because I
Yeah.
couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Sure. That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. So you really stood out as strong in mathematics amongst your peers when you were in high school.
I think so. I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. So you end up going to so when you were in high school, did you have like at the end of it, did you have any notion of what you might want to be when you grew up?
Not really, because I was just a kid, and
Mhm.
my mother decided that I would be good at chemistry. Don't ask me why.
Okay.
And my father said that I should go to economics department.
Oh,
Uh, and then, that was it. So,
did you have to decide in high school? I've been learning more about these international
yes, exactly.
differences. You had to
Exa-
decide in high school.
exactly. So I have to decide what my major would be in high school. So
Mm.
I wouldn't be applying for a college. I would be applying for a department in a college.
Ah, okay.
So that I don't know whether that system is still there in Korea, but it was like that back in those days.
Mm,
And so my father decided that I should be an economist. And in hindsight, it's sort of a residual legacy of this, again, military dictatorship, because
mm,
so the Korean development, economic development is a fascinating story, but this military dictator could be described as a benevolent dictator to an extent that because he took it upon himself to develop South Korea in this rapid development phase. But
mm,
then he was a military general, former military general, so he decided to use a bunch of economists as sort of a bunch of MBAs for
mm.
Korea Incorporated. Let's put it this way.
Uh-huh.
So there was a lot of respect for the econ PhDs back then,
Yeah.
before market economy took over the role of the government
What
substantially.
kind do you remember the names of any of the like or where they were pulling them from? Was it like particular universities and that they were bringing in these economists?
By universities, you mean the American universities? Because most
Or
of them were trained in the US.
they were
Yes.
was it coming from like the Chicago school or I know that Chicago I know that Chile brought in a bunch of Chicago economists
I think they were just all over the
all over
place.
the place.
Right. But the one economist who was, I'm told, influenced by the Chicago school, made an important transition from the government-led economic policy to the market-led economic policy. So there
Mm,
was the pivotal moment when this particular individual was the favorite of some military general,
mm,
and he convinced I don't know, top the president that this is not the way to manage the government, the economy any longer. Let's move on.
right,
Let's something along that line. So
right.
so it somehow the democratization of Korea that it was brought in a pretty smooth way because these economists who had this liberal, by liberal I mean the classical English liberalism as opposed to the American liberalism. That's right.
Yeah,
So because of this liberal, these economists came with a liberal attitude. They bit by bit convinced the powerful men
mm.
that democracy is not such a bad idea. And
Was that when you were young or was that before you?
yes, yes, but it was so people claim obviously many people take credit for the democratization and stuff, but from my perspective, it was a gradual effort. I
Mm,
think it's a
mm.
unique, perspective. So I don't want to push it too far
Sure,
because
sure.
I will end up, insulting some political scientist.
Yeah, sure, sure.
But I'm just trying to, emphasize the important role that economists played behind in the shadow, like can convincing various powerful men that let's let the market decide.
Right, right. Why do you think your dad thought econ would be the better fit? And why weren't you doing math? Why didn't you sort of say, I need to go and do a math degree because I'm so good at it?
Not really. I thought of actually going to the law school momentarily because I knew that the private sector was becoming big. So I sort
Mm,
of thought that, with my math skill, I might be a good lawyer.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
in the criminal court, but, but, somehow I guess my father was still convinced that this old style, the way of running the economy would persist for quite
Oh,
a while. I mean, we never had an in-depth conversation, but I'm sure that was his thinking. And besides, he was a banker, which means that he was heavily involved in interaction with the Ministry of Finance and stuff, and he had to follow the how should I say it, directive from these ministries, anyways. And so
yeah.
maybe he might have his perception about the importance of the government may have been a little bigger than in the reality, I guess.
Ah, I
Yeah,
see. Got it.
right, right.
Because that
So
would probably create a lot of stability. If the government's going to continue to use economists the way they have, that your dad
right,
might be thinking it's like a great job.
exactly, exactly.
I see. Okay.
So the way that I was asked by my father, not asked, basically I was told by my father to go to the econ department was because he was expecting me to become the manager, one of the managers of the Korea Incorporated.
Oh, okay. Got it. Got it.
So
Well, so had you
that's
had any econ when he had said that when you decided to major in econ? Had you taken a class or something?
in high school, no, there is no economics. So I just,
Oh,
I was like, this is your career. And I was like, I'm a good, back. So this is not going to fly among the Korean high school kids these days anyway. But back then, I was like a, very passive,
right.
traditional the types of. So
Oh,
so I'm coming from a different background, from a different era in some sense.
yeah, sure, sure,
Right.
sure. So you go to Seoul. Did you ever think about going anywhere else? I don't know a lot about the universities in South Korea, but you end up going to Seoul National University.
Yeah, it was the cheapest one to get into. So, and it had a decent reputation. So I didn't
Mm,
want to burden my parents with the tuition anyway. So
got it.
I thought
Okay.
that it was a reasonable thing to do.
How close were you to home?
So I stayed at home
Oh, you
throughout my
did.
college days. So which is quite a traditional thing to do, especially if you grew up in Seoul anyway. Seoul
Got it.
National is in Seoul, and it was reasonably close. Actually, I felt that it was closer to my close to home than my high school, so
Oh, I see. Okay,
it
got
was
it.
better.
Oh, you were the commute was less than it was in high school?
I think so.
Oh. So you go there and you major in economics. Was there a point where, because you ultimately don't end up becoming a banker. So was there a point while you were studying economics where you really began to like it just for itself?
Uh, Not really, because I still view that this career path that my father set for me, like become a manager of the national, I don't know, Korean Incorporated. So I took it seriously, and I wanted to do international finance or international trade because that
Mm,
was the career path for many Koreans back then.
mm,
Because Korea, just like China these days or Japan back then, was heavily reliant on the international trade
right.
for its development. So international economics was a big deal.
Yeah, yeah.
So in fact, so this is so the, so that's odd, but the reason why I chose to go to the Harvard, among many reasons, is because Jeff Sachs was known to be a very
Oh,
competent and very respected economist,
right.
international economist, and
Yeah.
many of my professors in my alma mater said that yeah, this is where you go to learn under him, under his
Oh,
supervision. Except that he was too busy, advising Russia, and yeah,
sure. He's very
and he was
busy.
not around. So,
Right, right, right,
so
right. Yeah, sure. So it was
yeah,
not econometrics at Seoul National University. You weren't like falling in
no,
love with so did you
no,
take any econometrics while you were there?
yeah, it was just a mandatory course, but I didn't like it. So
You didn't like it?
no, I
Huh.
didn't like it. So I guess it has something to do with the fact that they were teaching the old style, Coles Foundation style, large modeling, that type of the
Oh,
econometrics, right? I
yeah, yeah.
guess, and I was so I guess so in some sense the timing was right for me so you were going to ask me, I guess, about the causal inference and stuff like that, the
Hmm.
microeconometrics. So back when I was in graduate school, these movements were making a small dent bit by bit. The microeconometrics, I wouldn't call it a revolution, but evolution. And
Mm,
somehow I like the language and modeling philosophy and approaches better than the old style, Cold Foundation stuff. Even though later on I realized that depth and wisdom, the associated with this Cold style, approach, but somehow I didn't feel the chemistry
yeah.
with me and the Cold Foundation style, the modeling approach. So
Mm,
I guess it was more chemistry than the philosophy or ideology that led me to like the microeconometrics as we now understand.
sure, sure. You go to Harvard thinking you're going to study with Sachs, thinking you're going to be really specialized in an international,
Right.
but you do this simultaneous master's in stats too, right?
So that was just a total accident. So I realized very soon that Jeff Sachs was not around
Uh-huh.
because, and so I was like, okay, what do I do with my life? I was walking, and then Dale Jorgensen was passing by and said, "Hey, you did pretty well in the midterm. Stop by my office." So I go to his office, and he said, "Yeah, I like your, you did well, but I don't understand. Did you take any statistics when you were in undergraduate, the undergraduate student?" I said, "Yes," but Dale Jorgensen says that your exam shows that you are good at math, but you're not very good at stats. So,
Oh.
So, which is probably true, by the way.
Yeah. You could
And
tell,
else,
you could tell yourself too. You noticed that even about yourself?
yes, exactly, which was
Yeah.
probably true because I didn't quite know any statistics back then. I mean, I did take courses, but it was just for the purpose of taking a course and getting rid of the requirement,
Uh-huh.
but not really understanding it. And David Jorgen says that, yeah, you have to take this master's degree. And then he called up the chair of the stats department, and suddenly I was doing the same thing as
That's crazy.
it was crazy, but there was a lot of, I would call it a fate or destiny involved there because the chair of the stats department back then was Don Rubin.
Oh, no way.
So
Oh, yeah, of course. I didn't even piece this together. Yep.
so
Okay.
so so all these things somehow coalesce together to make me who I am.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So because it's not like as I was honest with you, it's just like I didn't have too much of a thought about being an econometrician. I wanted to become an international trade or international finance person, go back to Korea, become a manager of the Korea Incorporated. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the plans laid out by my father, and I didn't have any other option anyway, and so that's what I was going to do. And then suddenly, somehow Dale Jorgensen that says that I should become an econometrician, and I'm like, yeah, he's like a father figure to me. My father's not around, so
Right. Right.
I'll
So
do it.
you did it.
Yeah, and then I go to stats department. There was Don Rubin, and I'm like, I'm getting this training from exposure from him. So here I am.
When you get exposed to Don Rubin teaching you, what really stood out to you at the time? Because you mentioned the philosophy of microeconometrics was interesting. What were you gaining from that exposure to him?
So I don't know. He made everything sound so simple.
Mm,
And because back then I was trying to understand the meaning of instrumental variables because I could
mm,
follow the math for sure, but what does it exactly do? I could never understand because
mm.
other than the math. So I guess the back then instrumental variables was
And what year is it, Dr. Hahn, when you're in that matchup? Because I had your Vita up, but I've already closed
so
it.
I entered in 87. So 88 would be the year when I
Oh yeah,
was
so
being
it's
introduced
way
to all this
before
stuff.
his work on the on IV, but he's teaching you IV in the class.
No. He was just teaching the importance of the Neyman type Neymann's
Yeah, yeah,
randomization and importance of that. And so this idea of some variable being random being important to elicit the causal direction, that was already, in his lingo, let's just put it this way, even though it was
Mhm.
not explicit.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was an important lesson. And I was lucky enough to have, Hiro Imbens as my secondary advisor because
Oh my gosh.
Hiro was, trying to learn this. So all the stars were aligned for me in the sense of making me well prepared for this causal analysis because
Imbens would have just gotten there, right? He goes there
yes,
in 1989 or
yeah,
1990.
something like that. So,
Oh.
so he came in when I was still a grad student. And then what kind of exposure do I have? Other exposure. So yeah, so I TA for Josh Angrist.
Yeah.
So these people that had this special lingo that I wasn't expecting, but somehow their choice of linguistics, I guess, made
Mm,
an appeal to me because,
mm.
instrumental variables and the asymptotic distribution and all that stuff, I could understand the math and everything, but I could never follow the intuition, right? And so these people were, teaching me intuition. And
You
I
were
loved
learning the
it.
intuition about IV when you got like when Josh and Hito get there that you're really starting to get it right. You're getting the
Exactly.
late theorem. You're getting the late theorem right at the beginning of it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah, I'm an early learner, early adopter in this sense because it was still circulated in this, I don't know, little lecture notes and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
so my main advisor was Gary Chamberlain. So in
Mm,
that sense, I'm coming from the more traditional not traditional because it's not time series, but traditional microeconometric perspective and techniques. So I was attacking all this problem as a technical object, and again, I don't shy away from this description of myself as a technical econometrician. But because of my early exposure to people like Hiro Imbens, who became a secondary advisor to me and who's been a good mentor of mine, and Josh Engris, the same here. I mean,
Yeah.
and Don Rubin, so I could learn to piece together the intuitions underlying all these
Wow.
discussion. So I was just lucky. I mean,
Oh, that's
it's just luck,
amazing.
right?
But you
yes.
don't do this causal inference stuff immediately, right? I was just looking at it. Seems like your first paper that I would kind of call like causal inference is that propensity score paper, 98 Econometrica. But am I reading it wrong?
You're correct, but it's because my main advisor, Gary Chamberlain, was coming from the technical side of calculating and characterizing the semi-parametric efficiency bound. So
Yeah.
I was trained in this tradition. So my first publication actually was about the duration model and the heterogeneity and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and the information content in there. And Hito was and I were having coffee at some moment right before I graduated, I think. And Hito asked me this question. I don't understand why people run a regression of Y on the treatment indicator as well as covariates. That was his question.
He
Can it
asked
make
that
sense?
question.
Yeah, to me. And he was like, can you make sense out of that? Of course, I didn't know what to do about it. So it took me a couple of years to be able to answer that from the perspective of efficiency consideration. That is, at the end of the day, the conclusion is that neither is efficient.
Oh, oh, oh.
but in order to do that, I had to understand the efficiency aspect of the causal inference. But the problem is that I had to understand the language of the causal inference from that point on. So even though my training was primarily focused on the technical side of econometrics, I had to learn these things from the scratch.
Right.
I mean, the more detailed technicalities of the causal inference from the scratch, and then here I am. That's the first paper that I wrote. So
what's the hard jump from being a technical econometrician to being technical on causal inference? What are the real obstacles that you had to kind of come over first?
I would call that a language barrier, because back then causal inference was a little more intuitive. And the language was more randomized clinical trial, not in the traditional asymptotic framework. So translating everything into that asymptotic framework was the most difficult job. After that translation was done, it was pretty trivial, by the way. So the translation was the most difficult part. So,
well, who was doing that at the beginning? Was that what Imbens was doing, or were you?
No, not really. I think it was that translation into the IID framework, even though it is pretty obvious now. I think maybe I have something to do with that. I don't know that because I don't want to insult anybody, because I know that so many mentors of mine have influenced my subconsciousness. So I don't want to insult anybody. But in terms of actual usage of the paper, because most of the causal inference was done in the permutation test type of the perspective. So that's not really amenable with the IID framework that was adopted in my propensity score paper. So in that sense, maybe it's possible that people were aware of this translation, but they didn't think deep enough to, to think about the I don't know, merger of this, causal framework with the traditional semi-parametric, framework, I guess. So
yeah. Did you enjoy that kind of work more than your other technical econometric work, or was it all kind of?
I actually like the translation part a lot. So translation part is quite the most difficult job. So what I love doing is to read other people's papers, empirical papers, and then try to make sense out of that, and then try to make a mathematical, the symbol attached to that, make a model out of it, and then making sort of a, the technical analysis. I love that sort of the analysis a lot more than, I don't know, analyzing a given model that other people have already set up. Because,
sure.
I think I'm reasonably, because my background having these, I don't know, applied people, let's call them applied people,
Yeah.
Don Rubin, Hito Imbens, or Josh Angrist, as
Mhm.
well as a very theoretical econometrician like Gary Chamberlain as a main advisor. I think that sort of the background made me reasonably good at going back and forth between
Oh,
this, right? So
yeah.
there are other very able econometricians who are more onto the technical side, but I guess if you look deep into their background, maybe all of their friendship or the mentorship network consists of theoretical types, whereas
Yeah.
mine was more like a, I don't know, the collection of everybody. I guess
Yeah.
that's the consequence. I love doing this sort of the job better than the other one, I guess.
Right. Right. Wow. Oh, I'm so glad I did not piece this together because this has been sort of fun to learn it right in front of you. So, this paper with Petra Todd and Vanderklau. Can
Right.
you tell me a little bit, for the sake of the listener who might not know what I'm referencing? This comes out in 2001 in Econometrica on regression
Right.
discontinuity design.
Correct.
Could you tell me a little bit of the origin of that paper? How was that paper born?
Okay, so this is because I attended a talk on Josh Angrist wrote a paper, and his co-author presented that paper at Penn. Penn was my first job, by the way. Victor Levy was his name, and the paper used the Maimonides rule
Yep.
to figure out the impact of class size on the academic performance. And Maimonides rule is the ancient Hebrew scholars rule about the number of TAs. I forgot the exact
Yeah.
details,
The
but
class.
it
Yeah.
was there is a cutoff which induced the class to be the halved and the quads and stuff. But so I attended the talk, and Victor Levy is claiming that this is done by the instrumental variables estimation,
Right.
and I said that's wrong. I
You
was
did?
young. Yes, I said I was young and stupid. So in front of it, but Victor was very generous. He was like initially he thought that I was making a structuralist sort of the comment, but then after the seminar, I approached him, accosted him, and explained that this cannot be right. This is not an instrument. And Victor was listening, and he said, yeah, that sounds interesting, but do you have a solution? And I didn't. And I contacted Josh Angrist. I may have called him or something. And Josh did not like my,
He liked your comment, and
the
it wasn't
comment
an
that
instrument.
it cannot be instrument. But I argue that it's not an instrument. But you have something. You're onto something. But this is not an instrument. Was my argue.
What? Okay, I've never heard this before. So why isn't it not just a fuzzy regression?
Because the point is that regression discontinuity gets basically all the identification at the discontinuity itself.
Yeah.
Where,
Okay.
whereas by using the IV, they were trying to get the information away from the discontinuity.
Oh.
And I argue that this cannot be the right way of using this
How
data.
could you
And
tell? What was it in the talk that was giving it away? What were you bringing to that talk that was making you see that? Is this something in the past with Rubin or something?
so I guess so there comes my, I guess, subconsciousness. So this has something to do with the college admission policy when I was young, by the way. So
Ah,
Korean education is notorious for, volatile admissions policy because, for whatever reason, Ministry of Education decided to change, college application policy every single year. Importantly, though, when I was applying for college, they decided to have an equivalent of an SAT,
mhm.
but it's not a scholastic aptitude test. It was a scholastic achievement test. So you are tested a lot on a lot of subjects. They would come up with an aggregated number, and then you apply to one department and one college and stuff, right?
Mhm.
So let's say that your score is, I don't know, 102. Somehow you get accepted into that department. But if the cutoff from that department is 102, and if your score is 101,
Yeah.
then you don't get into there.
Yeah.
And so, people are wondering back then, many were, just talking about injustice about this, system,
Right.
people's lives and fate being dependent on just one point.
Mm.
But I thought that, back then as a young kid, I thought that this could be the source of determining the value of one department over the other.
Mm.
Because technically speaking, I mean, not technically, commonsensically speaking, the kid who gets a 101 and the other kid who gets 102, probably they're not that different from each other.
Mm.
So I would have thought that, the whole thing that led one kid to be accepted by one department and the other kid accepted by the other is a practically randomized clinical trial. So I
Yeah.
had that, nagging feeling all along.
Right.
Anyways, I guess that's the, trigger in my part. I cannot speak for my co-authors, by the way. I don't know
Yeah.
where Petra comes from. Where Petra and I talked about this for many days because we are, totally confused as to where this source of identification comes in, right? After Victor Levy's talk. And then,
Oh yeah, she's at Penn. Oh
yeah,
right.
she was
Yeah,
at
yeah,
Penn.
yeah, yeah. I'm getting it. Okay.
And then I think that somebody else was overhearing the conversation. I think it could have been Andy Foster. He mentioned something along the line that, yeah, there was some visitor from NYU who gave a talk that sounded similar to this. That was Wilbur van der Klauw, who was talking about the
Mm.
impact of scholarship. That the scholarship at this university
Right.
was based on that. And he also thought that it was instrument. So all three of us,
He thought that RD was an instrumental variable strategy, but you and Petra said it
no,
can't be.
so he also thought so, but even though Wilbert was a little more willing, that thought that it was instrument, but it's not quite an instrument. So he was
Oh.
anyway. So we decided, because we already had some lunches together and everything, we thought that three of us should keep on talking, and then
You and Wilbur, you and Petra. At that point, Vanderklau's involved.
exactly.
I see. Okay.
And three of us were like, all have personal experiences, I guess. In my case, I was thinking about my college application, I guess. And Wilbert probably was thinking about this data source. I don't know where Petra was coming from. Petra mentioned something about some employment law applied only to big enough corporations.
So you guys are actually, I did not realize this. You guys are actually grasping in the dark a little bit,
Exactly.
not aware that this is regression discontinuity design.
Exactly.
Oh, it was only presented in the by Angerson Levy as an IV paper.
Exactly. So we are trying to understand. So all of us thought that they're onto something.
Yeah.
But all of us thought that, away from the discontinuity, there was something wrong about calling it the IV.
Oh, right.
But then we didn't quite know how to express our idea.
Yeah.
So we just had to do the math. And then I think in the middle, Petra or Wilbert got a hold of this very ancient paper from some psychologist at Thistlethwaite.
Yeah. The Thistlethwaite or Campbell or something.
Right. And then we read their papers, and there was a whole lot of discussion about it. But it seems like that their discussion took the form of, so there's this time series model, which is like a threshold regression model. So something like a regime changes if the X variable exceeds some number. So in the time series model, it was all like a linear regression and dummy variable. So I think that in the old days, they were using this sort of the time series linear regression, so sort of the approach. So, that's how they understood the regression discontinuity. But we thought that, at least in Victor Levy's presentation of this Angerson Levy, he was not talking about that. He was actually literally talking about that discontinuity point implicitly. So we thought that, so, these old literature were not zeroing on the true source of identification. And here we are. And somehow when we wrote the paper, some people liked it. We were like, whatever. So let's present it. And some more.
And that's why y'all focus on smoothness. Is that right? So because I'm thinking to myself, I have in my notes, I was just, because now everything is changing a little bit in my head. This is so exciting. But like, so you actually were not dealing with an audience of economists and statisticians who thought, oh, the identification for RD comes from a randomized experiment. Nobody was talking about RD as its own thing at that time. They just had IV, maybe.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But it was a good co-authorship because we were just, like you said, scraping for, I don't know, some straws in the dark. All of us were. But all of us, in hindsight, had a similar intuition. It's just that we couldn't express ourselves well. Somehow, I guess each of us somehow finished other sentences.
Mm,
That was a true co-authorship, and I enjoy that process actually,
wow.
because it's not co-authorship these days are so well planned. Like somebody, okay, you do this and you do that, so it's all well planned. But
Right.
back then, also when three of us were talking, it was like we're not sure what we are doing.
Oh, that's so neat.
Yeah, so I
Oh,
loved it
wow.
actually. So
That was a very creative paper. It was very, very much, you didn't know where it was going and you had an idea. Is this right? You sort of could see a little bit of it, but you weren't really sure this
exactly.
smoothness concept would come out. Is that right?
Correct. So the smoothness is just like so at least my subconsciousness is about, okay, this kid who got 101 and the other kid who got 102, they should be similar. That was it. But then
Right.
how do you express it in terms of mathematics? I don't know. We're just talking. I don't know who came up with this idea of the smoothness
Mm.
or continuity, or I don't know. But that was it. But yeah, so it was an interesting experience. I loved it.
What was the most satisfying part of it when y'all kind of agreed on what the paper was? What did you like the most about that whole experience?
I like this idea of co-authors finishing each other's sentences and reinforcing and scaling up the other guy's thought processes. I thought that it was the most rewarding part of this paper writing. I mean, I had the luck and fortune of working with other co-authors afterwards, but these other papers and projects were a little more plannable, let's just say.
Yeah.
Whereas this one was completely, totally dark.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
So
Ah, what an exciting thing. And so when did you notice that? I mean, it's perfect timing because Josh's paper comes out in 99 and the QJE and Sandy Black's paper comes out in
exactly,
99. So you've
exactly.
got this, and then yours, what was it, floating around for a couple of years
I
before
think
that?
so. Right. Something like that.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly.
Who
So
handled it at Econometrica? Do you remember the editor?
that I don't know, actually. I don't know.
What did econometricians think about it?
So theoretical econometricians think that, okay. I mean, it's like I said, I mean, for me, this is a translation job, right?
Right.
So that I sort of got, in my mind, I was translating what these people, Sandy Black and Josh Angris, Victor Levy, these guys were doing. And later, let's see, David Lee had a similar idea, but I think that David is a little easier because his paper came out after we had this methodology cleaned up as a
That
math.
Lee Moretti and Butler paper, the
Uh,
close selection paper that he does.
exactly, that's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about because he could already zero in on this idea that discontinuity can give you something.
Right.
Whereas Sandy Black and, Josh Engers, they were just, scraping for some ideas in some sense. So, but, this translation, I mean, of their subconsciousness, right?
Mhm.
They were onto something, they couldn't quite express it. We were onto something, at least in the beginning, we couldn't quite express it. I mean, I thought this translation was so exciting.
Oh, it's so neat. I
Yes.
actually have completely forgot how empty the econometrics of RD was at this time. And I knew it was. I think I was really thinking of that old educational psychologist guy, that Thistlethwaite or Campbell,
Yeah,
have
exactly.
like created more of a framework of RD, but it's like it really did not exist in the worlds that we're talking about at all, if at
Right.
all.
Yeah, because I think one reason is that they were using the regression framework to
Right.
understand the RD.
Yeah.
But I think that's the reason why framework setup is so important to understand the intuition, because they might have had the right intuition. I don't know. But if
Yeah.
as soon as you use the parametrically specified linear regression framework,
Yeah.
then you deviate from this your own intuition, I think.
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
so, so in that sense, this little translation job was so satisfying. And yeah, of course, that I hope that Wilbert and Petra would still have the fond memory of us finishing each other's sentences
Yeah.
because I still do. I love
Why
that.
why do you think, Chen, why do you think you're so good at this translation job? Where does that come from?
Am I good? I don't know, but I guess I'm a foreigner, and so I mean the language barrier is something that I need to overcome,
Oh,
right?
right.
And early on, the one thing that I needed to overcome was that because I couldn't, parse out the how should I say that colloquial expression and everything, I had to, to look at people's faces and to, notice their facial muscles twitching
Yeah.
as a signal of what they're thinking. So I
Yeah.
guess I was trying to learn from unanticipated signals.
Right. And maybe too, that being such a technical econometrician and needing to translate means, and you said you would read these applied people and try to figure out what they were doing. You're never going to be someone who is not going to stop until it's technically figured out.
Yes, because it has to be because my job is there is a fine division of labor among econometricians, right? Somebody needs to set up the model, somebody needs to set up the model, refine the model, and
Mm,
somebody needs to, analyze it. I don't know, consistency, asymptotic normality, and all that stuff, and
yeah.
efficiency aspect as well. And somebody needs to figure out the potential irregularity because of violation of this, violation of that. So
Oh,
there will be a lot of, layers of work waiting even after the translation.
yeah.
So I think a good translation is pretty important because that will obviate, I don't know, waste of time of other able econometricians, I think.
Yeah, 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 sure. Sure. But looking at your Vita, it's not like it's full of causal inference. You stay broad, you stay fairly, you're working through a lot of technical microeconometrics, but it's not like I'm watching you participating in that matching era, of like a
No,
ton of the
no,
nearest
no.
neighbor match, so what does the 2000s and the 2000 and the 2010s, where did you how do you end up sort of choosing where you end up going on the, and where did you go after that paper?
So I guess I did some work on the panel data analysis.
Mm,
So long panel is what I did because back then there was this frustration that in nonlinear panel data analysis. So okay, getting back, let's dial back a little. In the linear panel data analysis, you can difference out the fixed effects and you can just proceed afterwards. I mean,
right.
so you should sometimes use the IV, you can just use the OLS, but at the end of the day, you can just difference out the fixed effects. In nonlinear models, it's not so easy. Sometimes you're
Mm,
lucky and you are able to do that, but it's based on your luck. So the idea was perhaps we can treat each individual history as a time series, short, but still a time series, and do
yeah.
something about it. That was what I thought could be useful to understand the nonlinear panel data analysis. So I spent some time on it. The other one that I spent some time on it was the estimation of the production function. I mean, this is really a research agenda of my co-author, the Daniel Eckerberg, who I think is now at Texas Austin, I think. But he was a colleague of mine at UCLA, and he was a student of the Ariel Pecos. And
Mm,
there's a fascinating aspect of the production function estimation, going all the way back to the duality, because
mm,
the duality, from econometrics perspective, is a way of finding the a way of estimating the production function, even
yeah.
though capital and labor are endogenous.
Right.
So what you want to do is, instead of regress the total cost on the cost on the factor price, and then you somehow invert it to find the production function. So
Mm,
this is like a instrumental variables estimation,
mm,
in its primitive form in some sense.
mm,
But I think that so this is my understanding of the plethora of the production function estimate these days. In the old days, when time series data were the king, then you could find a decent exogenous variation of the cost of capital.
mm.
Now, if you think about the application of the cross-sectional analysis, the cost of the production function estimation, you have to acknowledge the fact, face the fact that capital flows reasonably freely, which means that the variation of the cost of capital is pretty limited.
Right.
That means that the IV estimation using cost of capital, if you're working with a micro data set, is probably not going to be that successful, which
Mm,
explains why Pecos's paper, Ollie Pecos's paper has been so, influential. But there are lots of other, small, the issues that need to be tackled. And Dan Eckenberg was a very voracious consumer of econometrics, and his office was right next door to mine.
uh,
And on top of that, he loved drinking beer and he loved playing golf, both of which I loved. And one thing led to another. I did some research of production function estimation. So
yeah.
yeah, that I actually like doing the research in the on outside of away from the campus as well, because that's what Dan Ackerberg taught me. That is, you can do research by
You can do it
drinking
anywhere.
beer.
You can do
Drink,
it playing golf. You guys would play
exactly.
golf and do it.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's so neat. That's so
Yes.
neat.
Yeah. So
Wow. Well, so so what are you most excited about right now? What do you sort of see in the next few years of your or what do you see this next leg of your career sort of being about?
So I am, getting back and forth, but I am looking at panel data analysis as a primary source of my inspiration. I mean, it's
Mm,
probably because Gary Chamberlain, my main advisor, was primarily known for his panel data analysis anyway.
right.
But so in his case, he wanted to use it as a source of understanding APT, arbitrage pricing theory. In my
Yeah.
case, I'd like to understand it as a way of understanding the usefulness of the big data, because
Mm,
I think that there is this excitement about this large size of the data, which is typically microdata, but I
yeah.
have some doubts as to whether it has any information content for dynamic models, especially when there are, aggregate shocks involved. So what I'd like to understand is the interplay between the micro shocks, idiosyncratic shocks, as well as the aggregate shocks, and
Mm,
see if the when and if the big data can be useful, because big
yeah.
data by definition is a cross-sectional variation of microdata. So that's what I'd like to understand.
Yeah.
Whether it's going to lead to anything substantive or not, I don't know, but hopefully
Yeah.
it will.
Yeah. That's great. Well, this has been really, really nice. I am so excited that we got to talk and I got to hear your story and see how it how it kind of wove. I did not know that story about the famous 2001 Econometrica. That is really, really neat and has just added a window back to that era. Um, I want you to kind of end on this. I'd like you to sort of imagine there's like a young person listening right now, and they are very interested in econometrics, but
Mhm,
they're maybe a little bit early. Maybe they're like third, fourth year, or whatever, or maybe they're
mhm.
junior faculty. And I was wondering, if you could imagine having a beer with them or playing golf with them,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and you sort of are you're sort of watching a young person
right.
thinking about having a life as an econometrician. What do you think that would be the kinds of things that you'd probably tell them that you sort of think would apply to anybody?
Well, well, some of my success is surely due to my luck. I mean, basically, I was at the right place at the right time. Many of the good-natured the seniors somehow decided to help me, or somehow decided not to get offense when I ask questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, Josh Angus, when I called him up and asked for like, over my comment, he was actually encouraging me to think in this direction, which was important. So I guess, on the other hand, I guess I played no small part in finding my own mentor anyway, somebody with whom I had some chemistry. Somehow I had some chemistry with Imbens. Somehow I had a chemistry with Josh Angrist. And, I guess exactly because of that, they could, tolerate me, out, I guess. So I guess finding your own mentor, finding your own chemistry might be very important.
Right.
Because that way you can have a real conversation without worrying about, I don't know, hurting each other's feelings and, things like that. Right. And so luck plays some role for sure, because, it's not like, that I actively sought after all these mentors, but, on the other hand, I had to, introduce myself and everything. And so it's an interplay of luck and your own initiative in making friends with people who might inspire you.
Yeah. Sure. Well, that's exciting. Well, thank you so much. I know it's top of the hour, but it's been a real joy to hear your story. And I just want to say thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much. So thank you so much for listening.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Gonna see us through. Honey,